Hello everyone and welcome to my secret base. My name is Eddie and today we'll be looking at which Fox properties will be taking center stage in the MCU first. After the acquisition of 20th Century Fox by Disney, our minds went wild on the potential team-ups that we could see play out in the MCU. Spider-Man and Deadpool, anyone? But before we could get those team-ups, those characters need to be introduced. And we're not only talking about the X-Men here, we're also talking about Deadpool and the Fantastic Four. For the sake of the video, the X-Men and Deadpool will be considered separate franchises as they kind of were in a cinematic sense before the acquisition. I will also be bundling in any mutant with the X-Men as any rogue mutant will probably mean the X-Men are coming. Please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications. Let's get started. As I mentioned in my video about the Fantastic Four joining the MCU, they should be heavily tied into the last events of the Infinity Saga. And this is because, as I explained there, those events kind of give you your recipe to introduce them, especially the Snap and such, and as well as the Spider-Man franchise, since in the early Spider-Man comics he was very tied into them, as you will often see Spider-Man being compared to the Fantastic Four and such. And in my mind, we could see the Fantastic Four joining the MCU, and I'll be honest, I think the Fantastic Four will probably have a standalone movie within the MCU before any of the Fox properties. They're also the easiest one to integrate because they require less explanation as to their backstory, since it could just be dropped into the events of the last moments of the Infinity Saga, and then the rest of the tie-ins just happen naturally. But will they be the first franchise to be introduced in the MCU? Well, we'll get to that in a bit. The X-Men are a little harder to introduce into the MCU because they have to find a way to give them an origin story. There's a lot of speculation that Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness will introduce the mutants in a kind of reverse House of M, which honestly is a scenario that I could see happening. But what if I tell you that they don't have to go that hard? Because mutant actually already exists in the MCU, with leaked pictures from the set of Falcon and Winter Soldier showing the flag of Madripoor, which, for those that don't know, Madripoor has a big connection to the X-Men. In the past, Madripoor has been the set of many Wolverine comics, as well as serving as the home of Charles Xavier's school in the past. This could be a subtle way of introducing the X-Men or mutants into the MCU, and I'll do a deep dive into this later in this video. Deadpool is probably the easiest one to just throw into the MCU, and this is in terms of process. This is because at the end of Deadpool 2, we saw our favorite Merc messing around with the timeline. This could lead to him joining the MCU this way. Perhaps while messing with the timeline, he finds his way into the MCU timeline and is driven in during the events of Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. And we could finally get that big screen Spider-Man Deadpool team up we've all been wanting for years. The reason this franchise can see the light of day within the MCU sooner rather than later is because Ryan Reynolds has met with Marvel executives about the potential of Deadpool 3. Not only that, but the cast for this movie is already there, and they don't have to look any further than the ones they already have, unless they want to recast some roles or eliminate some roles for future use. Since this franchise has more of a foot within the MCU, we could see them joining the big screen sooner rather than later. But will it be first? That's yet to come. So now that I have laid out some of the groundwork for potential scenarios, who drops in first? In the past, I would have absolutely said Deadpool. I could have gone on how Deadpool was going to be the first franchise to join the MCU because of those talks with Ryan Reynolds and Marvel executives, and the fact that the franchise is very successful and that the cast is already there. But because of the R rating on the franchise, Marvel will probably have to do careful planning around how they want to integrate Deadpool into the MCU, if it gets integrated at all. Since Deadpool could be set on an alternate universe and then you could just have him flip between universes whenever he's needed. So while it could happen soon, it's probably not gonna happen before the rest, or at least first. Next are the Fantastic Four. This one could be helped by the current delay on all Marvel projects. Why? Because we could see Marvel rewrite some of the projects to include them, or to include the groundwork that would lead to them joining the MCU. Though I could honestly just see them being teased rather than debut, so they won't be first. Which brings me to the X-Men, whose introduction could be made easier than we think. How, you say? Well, as I mentioned before, you could mention that they've always existed within the MCU, just not at the capacity that people think they do. With Madripoor being introduced in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, we could see a scenario where we could see one or two minor mutants play a role in that show, especially now with the rewrites that could happen due to the delays. We could see one of these mutants explain that Madripoor is a safe haven for his kind after their parents gave him up, and that there's a secret organization. We could say that this organization takes care of these kids, though in this case, this organization will be a government organization and not the organization that we are familiar with. We could also have this tie in into the second Doctor Strange movie in a scenario where we find out that Scarlet Witch's powers did not come from the Mind Stone, that the Mind Stone was actually used to make her think that. In which scenario, she will also find out that there are more of her kind, but there's also a lot of people with a dormant gene. All of this information happening so quick, plus her desire to have her own kind, will cause her to create the reverse House of M event. And instead of no more mutants, we could get let there be mutants, which would awaken the dormant genes in many humans around the world. This doesn't mean that we'll be getting an X-Men movie right after this, but this could set up the cornerstones for that X-Men movie. As for Charles Xavier, we could see him as one of those mutants that actually had powers before the events. However, because there weren't that many mutants during that time, he really wasn't that involved or did anything at all, and just led a normal life. However, the events following this is what would inspire him to create a safe haven for all of these new mutants, no pun intended. As for Magneto, we could see his origin being a little bit more complicated, but we could tie those into the events of Captain America's Civil War. In that movie, we saw that there were multiple Winter Soldiers which were frozen in time for many years. What if Magneto was one of these people after being found by the Nazis and given to Hydra for experimenting with? And we could have him be awakened during the time of Civil War or a little bit after by Helmut Zemo, or maybe even he was awakened before, escaped, had kids which became Scarlet Witch, and Quicksilver was caught again and was sent to sleep once more. Then, after realizing what is happening currently with the mutants that are popping out, the same way he was back in the 40s by the Nazis. I do say that I would like to see James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender reclaim their roles for the MCU, and I do think we will see the mutants debut first in the MCU and then slowly evolve into what we would know as the X-Men. And while the mutants will debut first, I do think the Fantastic Four will probably get a movie before any of the other franchises. But there you go, the mutants will debut first. How do you think these franchises will be integrated within the MCU? Who do you think will debut first? Let me know in the comments below. Also, once again, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications. Please tune in next week as I'm going to cast the Power Rangers reboot, and it'll be a two-parter. One, if the characters were teenagers, and two, a scenario in which they're actually cast as adults which already experienced Power Rangers. See ya!